Protests over the war in Gaza have swept across the world. Here in the US, President Biden is facing a backlash from within his own administration over his ironclad support for Israel. I sat down with Hala Rharrit, the first US diplomat to resign over a policy she says is failing Palestinians and doing little to promote America's interests abroad. I'm Selena Downs. This is One on One. Hala Rharrit, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Selena.
Now, you worked for the State Department for 18 years. Tell us why you quit.
Well, I became an American diplomat 18 years ago to promote peace. Fundamentally, I believe in diplomacy, and I wanted to help my country. But unfortunately, President Biden's failed militaristic Gaza policy made it impossible to do that. I was watching and monitoring and witnessing and reporting back to Washington on a daily basis the ramifications of our policy throughout the Arab world, and I could see that it was helping no one. Obviously, it was disastrous to the Palestinians, but it was also not keeping Israelis any safer, and it was deeply undermining U.S. credibility. And I decided that I could no longer be part of the administration.
A part of me wonders, why put your hand up for that job in the first place?
That's a very good question. So I'm actually a political officer by training. I've never done anything public facing. This was the first, what we call a public diplomacy role. And so my entire career, I really spent it behind the scenes in government meetings, writing cables, that's what political officers do, and having a very deep understanding of the historical and political context of whatever countries we work in. But I thought it was time for something different, and honestly, it was an honor to represent my country and be the public face of the United States. And I believe in mutual understanding. I believe in the power of communication. And so before this latest conflict, I did well over 100 interviews on a range of topics representing the US government, whether it was Russia, Ukraine, China, Sudan, even the earthquake in Syria and Turkey itself. And I was proud to be able to communicate my government's policies. But I had a red line, and unfortunately this policy crossed that red line, and I could no longer do the job.
I mean, you mentioned a red line, and President Biden keeps reiterating that Israel has not crossed his red line. Do you believe that President Biden knows that US weapons are killing civilians in Gaza?
We can use his own words. He has admitted that Israel has committed indiscriminate bombings. He said that publicly. So we're well aware. And for me as an American diplomat, I heard that. And that is tantamount to us continuing supplying weapons in an illegal fashion. Because when we know certain things, we need to act, including if a country blocks humanitarian assistance, they are not eligible for some of our military assistance. So this was a very significant issue for me, that I felt that we were willfully violating our own US laws by continuing to arm Israel. And as an American diplomat, I swore an oath to the Constitution, and I could no longer be part of that.
Do you believe the US is complicit in genocide?
That's a very good question. I can tell you that I read South Africa's case very, very closely. I myself served in South Africa. I was political economic chief in our US consulate in Durban, and I'm familiar with even some of the judges from my time there of how well respected they are. And I read that case very, very carefully. I was still a diplomat at that time, and I was trying to make my own determination whether or not Israel was indeed committing genocide. Based on that report, based on the latest ICC's findings, based on my own monitoring of what has been happening in Gaza, and on a daily basis, I was reporting back to Washington images coming out of Gaza. That was part of my job. It's very hard to come away with the conclusion that they are not committing genocide. So yes, I do think that Israel is committing genocide. You hear their own leaders speak very willfully about trying to basically ethnic cleanse Gaza. These are their own words of intent, showing intent and doubling down on the intent. If anyone reads the ICJ report from South Africa, they're all quoted in there. So the argument that there may be indiscriminate killing, there may be impacts on civilians, even civilians may be dying of starvation, but it's not willful, it's not intentional is a very difficult argument to make when you have pages upon pages of Israeli officials showing intent over and over again. And in terms of US complicity, it pains me deeply as someone that served my country for 18 years to say that unfortunately I don't think we can escape that complicity because we are the ones continuing to supply weapons, even after that ICJ ruling of plausible genocide, even after so many things that we've seen, we continue to provide unconditional military assistance, which I'm going to reiterate is not helping Israelis whatsoever be safe.
Is that what you think should happen, stop the shipments?
Absolutely. I want to be clear, in line with US law. It's not a matter of being pro this or pro that. It's a matter first and foremost, as an American diplomat, of US national security. We cannot have exceptions to our rules when it comes to our own laws. We have the Arms Export Control Act, we have the Leahy vetting, we have the Foreign Assistance Act. All of these rules and regulations need to be abided by. Our allies and our adversaries are seeing that we are not abiding by our own laws, and that undermines our credibility immensely, immensely. And again, it is only emboldening extremists on all sides, including the far right in Israel, because no matter what happens, no matter what they do in terms of committing massacre after massacre, we are not conditioning our aid. So they really have no incentive to listen to us when we are calling for a ceasefire. So yes, for multiple reasons. One, abiding by our own laws, and two, for having diplomatic leverage on Israel and on Hamas as well, because if we are abiding by our own laws, we start to condition the military assistance. That will assist Arab states to put pressure on Hamas. We have to use our leverage, and that is what we have not been using thus far.
Do you think this latest ceasefire plan is a step forward?
Of course, it's a massive step forward, and I'm relieved to see that the United States finally pushed a ceasefire agreement and that the United Nations Security Council finally adopted this agreement. It's about time, honestly. It's, for me as a diplomat, disastrous that it took this long. And it shows the failure of this particular policy. But of course, I welcome it. A ceasefire needs to be achieved as soon as possible. And we're hoping that now there's going to be some action in this regard. We've seen that Hamas has potentially accepted. I think that's still up to debate, but that's what's being reported, at least publicly. But there's still silence on the Israeli side, even though this is supposed to be an Israeli proposal. And again, I'll go back to my point that we need to use our leverage to ensure this ceasefire takes effect.
With everything that you are feeling right now, we know that President Biden domestically is facing a lot of backlash over Gaza. You're a Democrat, a member of his party. Will you vote for him over Trump in November?
Oh, such a direct question. Look, I can just say that, quite honestly, I'm heartbroken. I'm really heartbroken. I'm not just heartbroken as an American, as someone that previously voted for the president. As diplomats, we're not supposed to be political. I actually entered the Foreign Service under Bush. I served under multiple presidents. I never once considered resignation. Being a diplomat, honestly, was my lifelong dream. I studied my master's here in Washington at Georgetown, studying at the School of Foreign Service. This was my path. And the fact that a president that I voted for is willfully enabling the mass killings of so many civilians, is willfully enabling the starvation of so many innocent civilians, is doubling down on a failed militaristic policy that is hurting everyone involved, Israelis, obviously Palestinians, and also undermining our own credibility. It makes it very, very difficult for me to be able to think that he would get my vote at this point. That's all I can say.
Would a Trump presidency be any different regarding foreign policy?
I don't think so. And this is fundamentally the issue. Obviously, domestic politics, there would be a lot of changes. We all know that and we recognize that. But in terms of foreign policy, particularly towards the Middle East, both sides of the aisle have serious compromises, I would say. They both receive campaign contributions from not just the most obvious, which is lobbying groups that support Israel, but also from the arms industry. And for me as a diplomat, that was extremely concerning, that our politicians were basically and continue to profit from war, not just this war, but wars in general. As a diplomat, that was unheard of for us. We were an open book. We couldn't even receive the simplest of gifts without having to file paperwork about it, for example. But that's not the case for politicians on both sides of the aisle, and that's a fundamentally disastrous issue that we as a country need to deal with and come to terms with.
Can you envisage a time when the US would ever recognize a Palestinian state?
Yes. I can tell you that this is something that this administration said it would do from the outset, and this is what is also so devastating. This administration took steps right after President Biden took power to fund UNRWA, for example, to also for the very first time for the State Department appoint a special envoy for Palestinian affairs. The rhetoric coming out of the White House and out of the State Department before this latest conflict was, we need to recognize the plight of the Palestinians. We need to be able to help them achieve self-determination, and that is the only way to secure Israeli security as well, and peace for both peoples. So we were there, we were once there, and it's very frustrating to me as a diplomat that we are not using diplomacy to get there again. It's clear that a two-state solution and the idea of Palestinians having their own state, having their own self-determination is the only path to peace. And we need to get back to that as an administration, as a government, to ensure peace and stability for the entire region.
Hala Rharrit, thank you for talking to One on One.
Thank you so much, Selena.